Ganbare Goemon is a long-running series of games from Konami that has appeared on many different systems starting from the NES era. Only 3 of the games were released on home consoles in North America: The Legend of the Mystical Ninja for the Super Nintendo, Mystical Ninja Starring Goemon for the Nintendo 64, and Goemon's Great Adventure, also for the N64. However, in Japan, the Goemon library of games is much more expansive, boasting over 20 major titles, making it one of Konami's most prolific and successful intellectual properties. And in the span of all these releases, the setting, characters, and humorous tone of the games has remained more or less consistent, with gameplay deviating very little from its action platformer roots. The best way to sum up the Goemon series is fun, wacky, and oh so Japanese. Good times, good times. Sadly, there hasn't been a major Goemon title since 2005, and the future doesn't look too promising for the series. But interestingly enough, in the early 2000s, Konami did make an attempt to rejuvenate and reimagine its legendary IP with a futuristic makeover, which took place in the forms of Goemon Shin Seidai Shumei for the PS1 and Goemon New Age Shutsudou for the Game Boy Advance. I'll take a look at the latter in this video, which is essentially a stripped-down, reimagined port of the former. Gone is the whimsical and folky Edo-era Japan setting of the previous games, and in its stead are futuristic highways, metropolitan cities, and convenience stores. The characters all go through some major changes too, most likely to appeal to the gaming demographics of the time, which translated to a generic, extreme, and spiky anime style that lacks any of the creativity or charm of its predecessors. Take the Kunoichi Yae for example. A serious, capable, long-haired female ninja wearing, gasp, clothing that actually covers her entire body. A first for female ninjas in Japanese pop culture. Well, in the new games she is replaced with Yui, a ditzy, ineffectual, hormone-driven girly girl clothed in what can only be described as what ninjas wear when they go out clubbing. Awful. Impact, the friendly giant robot that aids Goemon and his companions along their many journeys in combating more colossal foes, went from being a completely unique and stylish concoction made up of primitive technology to a bland machine that would be hard to distinguish from a line of any other giant mecha manga or games. And worst of all, Goemon's goofy, lovable sidekick Ibisumaru has been turned into this. No. No. Just no. Anyway, about the game itself, it's a decent 2D action-adventure game with a core of gameplay consisting of platforming action stages similar to its predecessors. However, unlike the older games, most of the stages aren't very memorable and are a bit overly long, linear, and repetitive. There are some fun platforming sections, though getting through them can be tricky at times due to the controls. While the older Goemon games had a nice fluid feel when moving and jumping, New Age Shutsudou suffers from stiff, almost robotic movement. Perhaps it's due to the tiny D-pad of the Game Boy Advance, but even using the analog stick on the GameCube controller, the movement still feels rigid. You can switch between Goemon and Ibisu on the fly, and both control the same except for differences with their attacks. Goemon's pipe attack hits fast, whereas Ibisu's hammer hits slow, but for more damage. Late in the game, it takes 2 hits from Goemon to take down most enemies, but Ibisu can accomplish this with a single hit. Which character is best to use depends on the situation, but to be honest, it really is best to use Ibisu more often than not because of the added power of her hammer. The major downside to this, however, is constantly having to listen to her voice. Her terribly shrill and annoying voice. You'll hear it every time you attack, every time you jump. It just does not stop. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Goemon New Age Shutsudou does mix up the gameplay a bit with swimming and shooting stages. There are 2 swimming stages in which you take control of the aforementioned Yui and are given 360-degree control, and 2 shooting stages playing as the characters Sasuke and Yoshitsune. These stages are pretty fun and are a nice change of pace from the standard platforming. Different levels of the game are accessed from an overworld map spread across 4 different areas, and any stage can be played multiple times after its initial completion. Aside from the action stages, there are town portions, which are a staple of the Goemon series. Here you can stay at an inn or buy food to recover health, stock up on defense items, talk to townsfolk, etc. etc. You can also save your progress at the end. Due to the abundance of health power-ups dropped by defeated foes, New Age Shutsudou is a cakewalk for the most part, and your biggest enemies in the game are falling to death and running out of time for a stage. Oh yes, there is a time limit in the game, which can be extended with clock items scattered throughout the level. I don't really know why there's a time limit, as it's completely unnecessary, but if I had to guess, it would be to add some artificial challenge to the game. As I mentioned before, action stages tend to be pretty long, and the strict time limit forces you to run through the stage as fast as possible. It makes the game feel very gamey. And speaking of gamey, you also have a limited number of lives, and once you run out of them, it's game over, resetting any collected power-ups and money to default. It's frustrating, unnecessary, and really adds nothing positive to the game experience. Next, I'll mention different types of boss battles. There's one type in which you control Goemon or Ebisu in a controlled arena, the normal fare, and another where you take control of the giant robot Impact in a first-person view, much like other titles in the Ganbare Goemon series. The normal boss battles can be difficult, but are made much easier with armor and rice balls, which are purchased in towns. With these, you can take enough hits to just repeatedly whack your opponents in his, or her, face until you win. The Impact boss battles, in contrast, are challenging and actually require some strategy to complete. Impact fights made a nice transition to the GBA, and capture the look and feel of their console counterparts pretty well. The only problem is that for all the effort put into the Impact sections, there are only 2 in the entire game. One in the beginning and one in the middle. The final stage ends with 2 boss fights in a row, which are just standard uninspired boss fights. It would have made sense to include one last Impact battle for the finale, but I guess the developers just got lazy or had no time to include it. Either way, it's a disappointing, wasted opportunity. Last, I'll mention the graphics. As you can see from the videos, Goemon New Age Shutsudou is not a bad looking game by any means, but it's also not very appealing either. The Impact boss fight sections look pretty good for a Game Boy Advance game, and I like the look of the town sections, but the rest of the game's visuals are just okay. You might think that it was just because it was released relatively early in the GBA's life cycle, but other games that came out before it, such as Golden Sun, Tactics Ogre, The Knight of Lotus, and another Konami game, Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, had far superior graphics, both technically and artistically. Graphics don't make a game for sure, but they certainly can add to the overall experience of a game. And comparing the aesthetics of this game with those of, say, Legend of the Mystical Ninja, which was released 10 years before it, it's hard not to feel let down by the lack of polish and effort put into the visuals. Overall, Goemon New Age Shutsudou is an interesting, albeit disappointing entry in the Ganbare Goemon franchise. The gameplay is dumbed down, the new futuristic setting is not utilized well at all, and it lacks much of the charm that defines the series. But as a portable action platforming game, it's not bad at all, and despite all the game's limitations and flaws, there's still a lot of fun to be had. It's a pretty hard to find game these days, so if you're into game collecting and see this game, pick it up. Anyway, thanks for watching and please rate or comment, and please check out my channel for future videos in the series.